So then, do you agree with Gashier's, worries? And what has the government of South Sudan maybe done to try and disarm, the civilians?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Mr. John Gashier. He has a lot of experience in South Sudan and with the politics we have had for many years. Thank you for joining us in the studio. And I want to say and to concur with him that, yes, indeed, when we were fighting a civil war with the North, almost half of our population or more than half of our population were armed because we had a common enemy that we had to defend our territory and also to win the war against the Arab in the North. As such, many people have always had guns in their hand, civilians or trained soldiers. However, with our independence, there are some areas where disarmament have taken place. There are some areas where disarmament have not taken place because there was also insecurity. The government have tried its best. We have a DDR program which John was a part of, and we continued to disarm civilians in many other areas until the conflict of 2013 came again, where the civilians were rearmed again because there was a whole insecurity in the country. So speaking of disarmament at this point, I think depends on how the peace implementation is carried out.
All right, thank you. Gentlemen, we shall be coming to you in a short moment. We did promise to talk to the East African Legislative Assembly Speaker on what is happening in that EAC regional parliament. That is Daniel Kidega. We have him live on the phone coming to us from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Mr. Speaker, how dire is the situation of the EAC Secretariat reportedly being, the member states not remitting the full amounts to the EAC Secretariat?
Thank you so much, KTN. I do not like to exaggerate the situation, that the situation is so dire. But the facts of the matter are that the partner states are not beating the deadlines of their contribution to the EAC or to Arusha. Most partner states are in arrears. And this arrears, we are pushing the partner states to do due diligence to the commitment they have made in terms of funding the community. Because the absence of them not bringing the money in time causes a lot of administrative hiccup to the general integration project.
So, Mr. Speaker, this delaying by the member states to remit the funds, how much is it affecting, operations of the EAC?
I can confidently tell you that the implementation of this financial year budget still stands below 60%. And that is the reflection of the efficiency of our integration process. So that to add to the viewers and to the listeners, the message is that the integration process is ongoing, but the efficiency at which we are working or the speed at which we are implementing the integration projects are being affected by the underfunding by the partner states. If we look at the side of the funding, which we have been relying on, which is the government partners, the remittances from the government partners are also taking a nosedive. So our integration process is facing very serious challenges if the partner states don't pull up their stocks.
So, despite the defaulting, Mr. Speaker, is there some kind of assurance or political will from the member states to maybe step up in the future?
One clear fact is that the political will of the partner state towards integration is unwavering, it's not questionable. What remains a bit of a problem is, one, the bureaucracy involved in transmitting or remitting funds from the capitals to Arusha. That's one. We need to address the bureaucracy that's involved in the process. And then two, the prioritization of the funding of the East African community along the long list of the priorities of the partner state. I think there is need for shifting where the East African community falls in the priority of our partner states to take a top position in their priorities. Political commitment unquestionable. The heads of state have committed themselves to this project, and this political commitment must be reflected in the funding process.
Thank you, Mr. Kidega. Daniel Kidega there, the East African Legislative Assembly Speaker. Daniel Kidega speaking to us live from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The East African community undergoing some cash problems there. Tanzania is the biggest defaulter, is yet to pay $5.5 to the EAC Secretariat in Arusha. Uganda is yet to pay some 4.5 million US dollars, and Kenya has yet to pay $3 million US dollars. Rwanda is the only country that has paid up fully. That is a developing story in the region that we are keeping an eye on things, how things are at the East African community. Gentlemen, speaking of which, South Sudan is the newest member of the East African community. Mr. Gashie, how big a role will the EAC play maybe in efforts, to take South Sudan forward and to end the conflict?
Thank you, Ben. Perhaps again, Ben, you have Uganda and you have Kenya. These are in real sense, the very pivotal countries in the East African community. Now, Sudan, South Sudan, is larger than Kenya and Uganda put together in terms of the landmass. South Sudan has been perhaps the fastest growing market for Uganda and Kenya. Indeed, some of the largest financial institutions in Kenya, the Equity Bank, the Kenya Commercial Bank, the Cooperative, they have had, various financial banking services, providing in South Sudan. Perhaps there are more than, and perhaps the ambassador here would correct me, there are more than 250,000 Kenyan and Ugandans doing all sorts of things in South Sudan. South Sudan, since perhaps the latest figures, 2013, I think South Sudan was slowly becoming Kenya's, if not sixth, perhaps the fifth, trading partner. Now, when we put that then in that context, for East Africa, and specifically for Kenya and Uganda, and to a large extent Ethiopia, we cannot. It is in our own interest, first and foremost, security, economic and trade, to help to ensure that South Sudan does not, shall I say, go the Somali way, shall I say, does not perhaps experience a more serious bout of violence. It is in our own interest. Forget about whether South Sudanese want us there or not. That's a huge market. Now, put it this way. A lot of people talk about South Sudan as perhaps being a desert because they don't understand the topography. South Sudan is really at the heart of what we call tropical Africa. Now, it is at the crossroads between Equatorial Africa and Central Africa. That is a very fertile. Now, South Sudan has huge resources, mineral, fisheries, agroforestry, and what have you. Now, so it is in our interest, Ben, that Kenya and Uganda and Ethiopia and Sudan to the north, that South Sudan does not get any worse. Now, if it does get any worse, then the chickens will be coming home to roost. What am I saying? We share people. We share, boundaries. Now, and the guns I was talking about, the refugees I was talking about. So it is in the interest of East Africa that we do whatever it is to bring Sudan back to normalcy.
Right. Mr. Ambassador, we have read or heard of problems in terms of course the oil prices are very low, affecting South Sudanese economy. We have heard of problems between South Sudan and Sudan in terms of the pipelines issue and all that. So again, like Mr. Gashe is saying, Kenya, Uganda, the rest of the East African community becomes very important for South Sudan as well. So how serious is the government in terms of tapping up all that potential market for the East African community, and of course in connection with the security situation, which is at the heart of everything?
Thank you. South Sudan, before the 2013 conflict, was known for oil production. And just the oil itself, the oil sector, was able to bring the economy of South Sudan to a regional stage. With that being said, the oil industry in South Sudan was developed mainly by the Chinese through Sudan during our crisis with Sudan, the civil war. However, South Sudan, after our independence, we have been trying to tap on the other resources that have never been tapped in South Sudan. As Mr. Gashia said, we have oil, which is the other side of it now, but we have agriculture. We have minerals that have not been tapped on. We have the wildlife conservation in South Sudan. That I think these are huge resources that if the conflict was not there, I think South Sudan within the region was going to be an economic factor to reckon with. And as a result, we continue to say that the country has a huge resources that once the peace comes, we will be a major role, we will play a major role in the region.
All right, let's go back to the insecurity issue and the peace agreement and everything. Mr. Gashe, there are some organizations which are saying that South Sudan should be put under trusteeship of the United Nations, that it to avoid is the situation that dire?
Well, I think that would be perhaps asking, stretching it too far, that the United Nations should then have a mandate of a sovereign country. Now, South Sudan is a sovereign country. It is indeed is part of the UN, is part of the international community. And to go to the extent that then the UN would recolonize South Sudan, so to speak, because a mandate, really you're saying that the people of South Sudan will be denied their sovereign right to determine who it is. In any case, why South Sudan? Why not Syria? Say, for example, why not Afghanistan? Then, therefore, why not East Timor? And perhaps then why not the Balkans? Right? So, I think that for me would be a no-go area. Now, having said that, is the United Nations, is the international community, do they have a duty, a moral obligation, a security obligation to help South Sudan? Certainly. Is there something that they can do that they haven't done? Perhaps to hold the leadership, both in the opposition and in the government, accountable, and to bring substantial pressure, and shall I say sanctions, or to bring these people together, for the United Nations to abdicate its role in trying to help South Sudan, Sudan sort its issues, and then take on, a supranational, I think, for me, it doesn't cut.
Mr. Ambassador, in the past you have faulted some of those figures that are given by the United Nations about the humanitarian situation on the ground in South Sudan. Do you think the UN and the international community in general have done enough to try and end the conflict in South Sudan?
Indeed, some of them have done it. But UN is an independent organization. We continue to work together, and we appreciate all their efforts in helping the current crisis. However, I think their mandate is a little bit extreme on the leadership of South Sudan. And also, as Mr. Gashi said, South Sudan is a sovereign state with a leadership and all institutions functioning. Such calls for UN to take over South Sudan is uncalled for. And I think the Africans in general should learn from this. Since Congo was placed under the UN, what has improved until today? And what is so particular about South Sudan after gaining the independence in 5 years, there is a call for UN to take over. This is undermining the leadership and the sovereignty of the country. Burundi are going through the same problem. Somalia now going through the same problem. UN have never said they want to take over Somalia. Why particular South Sudan?